Hello and welcome. Today we will address the question, is media literacy being practiced to its full capacity? And joining us is Theresa Redmond. Theresa, we couldn't have a better person to talk about that question because she's a combination of both media literacy expertise as well as education expertise. She's the professor of media studies at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. She's also a media literacy consultant to PBS Network, holds a doctor of education. As I was saying, she's an education expert from Boston University. She's an award-winning arts-based teacher with varied interests. She's been an author of many publications on media literacy as well as media education. She's been on the board of NAMLE, board of directors at NAMLE. And intriguingly, she is interested in a hybrid agenda that focuses on issues of preparation, fluency, and empowerment in the digital age, with an emphasis on the effects of creative inquiry on learning. Theresa, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Sure.
I know I cannot do justice, full justice to your rich and varied background. So if you'll forgive me, we can proceed with the broad question. Do you think media literacy is doing enough, or are we exploiting media literacy in practice to its full capacity?
Well, I'll kick off with this phrase varied that you used, and I'll recognize that the media literacy field, media literacy as a knowledge base, as a pedagogy, it's all varied. And so in terms of the question, is media literacy being practiced to its full potential or fully? I think we have a long way to go, but that's not necessarily a deficit. That's an opportunity. It's a possibility. And I think it's exciting. And to some extent, we may never catch up in the emerging media forms will shift the way that we engage in practice. But I think the core concepts and key questions of media literacy that various organizations have designed, developed, and disseminated do anchor us. But in terms of this question, I think there's so much potential, and there's potential in a couple of different ways. First, I think there's potential for media literacy to have a stronger foothold, to be enacted and integrated in K-12 more fully. For this to happen, we would need it to be a core component of teacher education and teacher preparation programs. So that's a second area where there's a great opportunity to meet the promise and potential of media literacy, because still we don't have media literacy as a foundational component in teacher education. And then finally, as a pedagogy, I believe media literacy is not only a subject of study, but a way of teaching. As a pedagogy, teachers and educators, both inside and outside of schools in both traditional or non-traditional contexts, would, I think, be inspired by the many ways that media literacy would enhance inquiry and creative expression in teaching and learning of so many subjects.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to give an example. So I was in a meeting with Dr. Antonio Lopez and Dr. Jeff Scher, who are also members on the board of the International Council for Media Literacy. So you may be speaking with them later.
Yes.
But we were getting really excited about the reality that media literacy is one of myriad climate solutions. And just this idea that a field as cross-disciplinary as climate science or environmental literacy or sustainability can benefit from media literacy as one of many solutions, I think is an example of how the promise and potential hasn't been met, and we're still able to unfold that.
Great. Theresa, that's very interesting. And of course, I do recognize your work in eco-media literacy along with Antonio and Jeff. What's interesting to me is what you said about media literacy being pedagogical as a methodology that needs to seep into several subjects. And therefore, obviously, the teacher needs to be completely prepared to take this forward. How do we do that?
So again, it's contextual. So when we look at the varied ways that media literacy could show up in the curriculum, it can show up in the content areas that predominate currently. So English language arts, social studies, arts education, physical education, music, science. We see the excuse me, not the North Carolina Media Literacy Alliance, that's another organization, but the National Association for Media Literacy Education has formed an alliance of these professional educator organizations. And so media literacy can be incorporated into these traditional knowledge areas or content areas. But when I discuss it as a pedagogy, I think that's where we can start to look at media literacy as an inquiry process. And so the kinds of ways that we build knowledge in the classroom can benefit from media literacy practice, and the insights media literacy offers into information gathering, into analyzing and evaluating information, as well as into the ways that we communicate what we've learned or express our learning. So in terms of assessment, one of the ways I use media literacy as an assessment in my college level media literacy course is through Remix, where students are invited to synthesize readings and materials that we use to build knowledge in creative ways through visual, multimodal expression. And in that, Remix becomes an assessment strategy that leverages media literacy.
That's very interesting, because one of the things that media literacy really at the time that we are speaking, it seems that media literacy needs to recognize the prosumerist nature of the media user, which is basically that the media user is both the consumer as well as the producer of media goods and products and texts. And what you're speaking or what you're telling me speaks to that role of the media user. Do I hear the undertone of responsibility here, or am I reading too much into it?
Say more. What do you mean, the undertone of responsibility?
Should the media user be taught to be more responsible in the ways in which they use and produce, and even if it's Remix, in terms of the way that you're looking at media literacy, it seems almost metaphorical to me, because how you construct text is how you're looking at media literacy, right? So should we therefore be more responsible than we are?
I think that's a difficult question, because I want to kind of reject that question because it suggests an either or. And one of the exciting things about media literacy is its applicability to so many different processes and content areas and aspects of teaching and learning, both inside and outside of schools. So as an example, I would hesitate to suggest that responsibility is on media consumers or creators alone. I think that one of many solutions to different kinds of social issues we face in the 21st century is to increase media literacy so that audiences, users, creators are more media literate. But we also need the kinds of thoughtful business practices from our technology businesses that would promote expression, or that would enhance accurate information in online spaces, for example. So we get into a duality there that I think is a little messy.
So one of the things I want to, almost in conclusion, which is regrettable, but got to do it, is that recently you spoke on Voice at Radio. You said when people engage in creative expression, we can essentially cultivate empathy, which is, a kind of, it should be at least a kind of goal for media literacy. Could you explain that a little bit?
So that particular sound bite that you pulled from that interview comes from my discussion of Remix as an expressive inquiry strategy in the media literacy classroom. And I had my own research-based reasons for incorporating Remix as a participatory culture practice into my media literacy classes. But one thing I learned by opening that door was from my students, and often students in media literacy done well are central and maybe even foregrounded in the entire process. But one thing I learned from my students is that they were learning more about media literacy knowledge and skills through each other's expressions than they thought they would. So the ways that we interpret and synthesize and make meaning of information and then express that understanding is so varied depending on our own prior experiences, our identities in the world, our personal locus, for instance. And so when I talk about creativity as a pathway to building empathy in media literacy education, I'm referring to this idea that we can better gather insight into someone else's perspectives, grind a lens to see the world through their eyes when we are invited to create and consume expressions in this authentic way.
Right. So, and that is a form of critical thinking, isn't it? I mean, empathy is,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
that is a kind of critical thinking that media literacy purports to build.
yes.
So that might be the right methodology according to you. But Theresa, that's all the time we have. I hate this, but we've got to end this right now. But thank you very much for those lovely insights and for your time.
Thank you also for your time and for putting this project together and gathering perspectives from so many in our community. Take care.
Thanks. Take care, Theresa.